Hello and welcome to yet another installment of our webinar series on the energy transition, a webinar series that we organize here at Esade Geo, Esade's business. Excuse me for that. That we are organizing here from at Esade Geo, the Center on Geopolitics and Business at Esade Business School. And we're organizing this with Foundation Repsol, who is a founding a supporter of Esade Geo. I am Ángel Saz-Carranza. I'm a professor at Esade on strategy and policy, and I'm also the director of Esade Geo Center. So we have been organizing and thinking and talking about the energy transition for quite a few years now. And today we're gonna be talking about a major topic, which is how industry might be affected and should develop in coordination with the energy transition. Today's webinar is aligning industry and energy transitions for a climate neutral EU. As many of you know, the EU is legally committed to reaching climate neutrality by 2050. This will mean important challenges for many different areas of society, in particular for industry. So what we want to focus on today is how this future net zero economy might affect and how it relates to the EU industry's competitiveness. For this, we have four excellent speakers for today's panel. We first have Director Joaquim Nunes de Almeida, who is the director in charge of mobility and energy intensive industries at the European Commission. Which is in the Directorate General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship, and SMEs, DG Grow. So welcome very much, Mr. Nunes. He is a veteran of the European Commission and has passed through many different areas and units and an expert in internal market. Next, we also have Ángel Bautista, who is the Director of Institutional Relations and Regulatory Coordination at Repsol. He will be giving us the view of Repsol, one of the major oil and gas companies in Europe. He is in charge of the relationships with Spanish and European institutions and also with international organizations such as the International Energy Agency and the B20 business process of the G20. He has prior experience in financing and investor relations. So welcome, Ángel. Third, we have Brigitta Huckestein. She is a senior manager for energy and climate policy at BASF, so one of Europe's main chemical players. She is a expert in chemistry, has been working in many different industrial and chemical associations at the international national level, and has a background or started her career in the plastics division at BASF. So welcome, Brigitta. And finally, we have Stefan Lechtenbaumer, who will give us a view from another and very well-reputed think tank. He is the director of the Future of Energy and Industry Systems at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy. He's also a professor in environmental and energy systems at Lund University and a manager or the general manager of C4 Climate, which aims to accelerate the transformation of industry towards climate neutral practices. So thank you very much, Stefan, for being here with us. So today, our plan is to be discuss for about an hour and 15 minutes at most. We will first have each speaker have a 8 to 12 minute intervention, and thereafter we will engage with with them through questions and answers. So please use the chat to pose your questions, which we will be directing to them. Without further delay, I will give the floor to Mr. Nunes. Mr. Nunes, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. Dear panelists, good afternoon from Brussels. So I'll start my speech by providing a short answer to the 5 questions that we were asked by the organizers. And then I will provide my suggestions to reinforce the cooperation between the manufacturing and energy sectors. So the first question was, how can we align the energy and industry to transition to net zero? Well, the current geopolitical context and increasing energy prices show how important it is in Europe to increase the energy efficiency and to accelerate the deployment of decarbonized energy sources to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. They are the main purposes of the new Commission proposals in the climate packages adopted in 21, the Fit for 55 and the Winter Package, according to the Paris Agreement and the climate law. The updated industrial strategy adopted in 2021 aims to support this energy transition while reinforcing our strategic economy, and it focused on 3 main strands. 1, strengthening the resilience and the foundations of the single market. 2nd, dealing with the EU's strategic dependencies. 3rd, accelerating the twin transition to green and digital. So both strategies will help to steer long-term investments in all industrial ecosystems and create new opportunities for European businesses, notably in manufacturing industries, renewable and decarbonized energies, building renovation, integrated energy infrastructures, transport systems, batteries, hydrogen, digital and space applications. We need to boost investments. In addition to InvestEU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the EU will invest in multiple ways. 1, the Horizon Europe program for research and innovation, with all its tools, will continue to play a role for breakthroughs in the green and digital transition. Secondly, the Innovation Fund will continue to provide critical support for the commercial demonstration of innovative low-carbon technologies in multiple sectors. And thirdly, where necessary, our industrial policy should also benefit from agile forms of public-private partnerships and new forms of cooperation between private and public sectors to accelerate the delivery of innovative solutions that would not be achieved otherwise. All these initiatives will support the EU objective to become the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. Sort of to give a sense of a broader reply to your question, I think that what is needed is a stability of the legal framework, so as to know what is the legal environment in which you are situated, plus what are the elements of state support, both from the EU and the member states, that you can get. The second question, what are the challenges to decarbonizing energy-intensive industries while maintaining competitiveness? The first challenge for energy-intensive industries is to get access to affordable, abundant, and decarbonized energy, the related infrastructures, the innovative technologies, and the skills. The second challenge is to be able to invest in commercial low-carbon technologies while remaining competitive at the global level. So this is more about the affordability and the capacity to deploy investments than about technology. So I don't think we've got a technology problem. We have a capacity of transforming that technology into a necessary investment scale and a political and administrative capacity to process all this through. And in particular, highlighting all the permitting needed to get the raw materials we need for the transition, because a lot of the energy solutions require raw materials that we need to start mining more in Europe and getting more from outside Europe. Permitting on renewables and permitting on improvement of the grid. There's a big backlog there, and we have a problem that needs to be handled by all of us, EU and member states. And these challenges were well described in the master plan elaborated in 2019 with the stakeholders in the high-level group on energy-intensive industries. The third question was what kind of policy instruments, both demand and supply, are needed to boost the deployment of low-carbon technologies. The climate law, the climate target plan, the Fit for 55 and winter packages are the new regulatory framework to steer the future investments for the energy transition in Europe. For energy-intensive industries, the ETS and CBAM proposals will be the main drivers, and they're currently assessed by the Council and the European Parliament. In parallel, the right enabling framework has to be put in place to support this transition. The updated industrial strategy proposed in 2021 made several suggestions: power purchase agreements, contracts for difference, sustainable product policy, blueprint for skills, and a better mapping of infrastructure needs. Following the master plan of 2019, a transition pathway for the energy-intensive industries was drafted and is now submitted to public consultation. Several low-carbon technologies are already available. The current and new regulatory framework will steer investments in the different ecosystems. For example, it's well known that 37% of the recovery and resilience facility will be devoted to projects aiming to fight climate change. And there has been a very good uptake by the member states of this 37% figure. We didn't have much trouble as European Commission in asking and getting the member states to put 37% of the money on climate change related investments. So to reach climate neutrality by 2050, new technologies have to be developed and then deployed at large scale. This is the purpose of several funding instruments such as Horizon Europe and the Innovation Fund. More venture capital should be also raised to boost the innovation in clean techs. We're talking about things like batteries, hydrogen, raw materials, solar. We need to develop pipelines of projects to attract support and put businesses in touch with banks, with the member states, with promoters, including third countries, which we also need. We want to be as resilient as possible, but we want to keep being an open economy, and we will need to source a lot of our needs from third countries. Now, the fourth question, what steps are needed to ensure abundant, reliable, and affordable decarbonized electricity for energy-intensive industries? Well, the energy transition will affect all industrial ecosystems, not just the energy-intensive industries. And let me remind you that electricity needs will double between now and 2050. That means that a systemic approach has to be followed across the ecosystems. And this is one of the objectives of the preparation of the transition pathways for the most important ones. There's already a draft for energy-intensive industries, mobility, and construction. The one on renewables is under preparation. The key challenge at the end will be to keep an overview of interlinkages between them, in particular to assess the needs in terms of energy infrastructures. And I'll come back to this point in a few minutes. The fifth question, how can we speed up investments into renewable energy sources, energy storage, grids, interconnections, and industrial transformation in the EU? Well, I'd say that the key challenge at this stage is the speed up to get the permits to build new infrastructures and the new renewable and storage installations. The Commission insists, as I said before, more and more on this issue to be tackled. And it's a good signal that the new German government has also identified this bottleneck for the success and the acceleration of the energy transition. Other challenges will be to get affordable access to the appropriate workforce with the right skills and to the primary and secondary raw materials. Now, how to reinforce the cooperation between manufacturing and energy industries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, we'll need to invest an estimated 392 billion more each year in the energy system than it did in the period 2011-2020. The transition will only be a success if the EU is able to do the right investments in the right place and at the right time to ensure cost effectiveness, competitiveness, and achievement of the climate objectives. Achieving climate neutrality in the industry and power sectors requires coordination between both in order to ensure the provision of affordable and reliable sustainable electricity, in particular to better and more integrated energy infrastructures. The energy infrastructures have to be modernized to ease the increasing role of electricity and hydrogen. For example, electric grids have to become smarter to better match supply and demand. Pipelines have to be built or retrofitted to allow the use of hydrogen as a new energy carrier for the decarbonization of energy-intensive industries and several transport means. New charging stations have to be available for the deployment of electrical vehicles. As mentioned in the policy brief released in 2020 by Stefan and his colleagues at the Wuppertal Institute, the industry, energy and infrastructure transitions towards climate neutrality are interdependent and strongly interlinked across the EU. They therefore need forward-looking and more integrated planning. And in this regard, last December, the Commission set up the Energy and Industry Geography Lab, a user-friendly online tool that provides geospatial information for companies and energy infrastructure planners. This map-based interface enables online data management, visualization, and analysis of data related to energy and industry, helping policymakers to plan the key changes to decarbonize the economy. A last point before concluding. The EU represents less than 8% of global emissions. That means that decarbonization should also be achieved abroad. EU engineering companies, manufacturing industries, and utilities have to join forces to grasp new business opportunities in other regions of the world where the growing potential will be high. I'd like to conclude with this thought that it is essential to work together to succeed and deliver on our ambition, Commission, Member States, industry, and other stakeholders. We want a modern and competitive European industry, which will remain the key enabler for a sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And we count on your support and collaboration to deliver on these ambitions. Thank you very much for your attention. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nunes, for this great overview of the policies and different policy actions happening at the EU level to tackle this systemic transition that we are discussing here today. And I take also your point on collaboration, and I think here we have a very diverse panel that hopefully can speak to that as well. So let me give the floor now to Ángel Bautista from Repsol and start a round of speeches from the from industry and also from think tanks. Ángel.
Thank you very much, Ángel. Thanks, Esade, for the kind invitation to participate in this prestigious event. Bon dia, Director Nunes. Hallo, Mr. Lechtenwurmer und Frau Högestein. Vielen Dank. Ich hoffe, dass nach der Pandemie bald können wir uns persönlich kennenlernen. I would like to begin by expressing our full commitment with the climate ambition of the European Union, in line with the commitment of my company, a company that is both energy and industry. Um, and obviously, our ambition to keep Europe as a champion of climate, and also the champion of citizen and social welfare. But I want to be today a little provocative. But are we using the right regulation tools to achieve this climate neutrality? Do we do we want in Europe to keep our industry, or sometimes do we want to outsource it? Because I've just yesterday, when I was preparing this intervention, I was reading something. Two-thirds of the reduction of emissions achieved by the European Union have been because those industries have moved into other countries that have not our regulation. So the regulation of Europe has achieved a very important thing. We have the most efficient industry in the world. So the best we can do for our planet is to keep it here. As you know, Repsol, we are a multi-energy company, basically from an origin in oil and gas, that we were the first in our sector to set a net zero ambition for 2050. We are also the Spanish company with the widest portfolio of energies, from renewable electricity generation, oil, gas, biogas, hydrogen, and in the near future, renewable hydrogen and low carbon liquid fuels. In the same way that we are convinced about the need to adopt swift climate and energy policies, we believe that this ambition requires both breakthrough technologies and also stable policy frameworks, like the director has just mentioned, to enable all the solutions we can have to for the reduction of emissions. But let's not forget one thing: Fit for 55 involves the revision of many rules approved as recently as 2019, which means that a lot of that regulation is still not adopted by national legislation in some countries. It is essential to be aware that if a ton of steel is produced in China and then sent to Europe, it has a 50% higher footprint than actually produced in Europe. First, because of the energy mix in China, that is worse, that is a 30% of that difference. And then you must transport that ton of steel into Europe. So let me speak a little about our view on the new regulation. First, we welcome the carbon border adjustment mechanism, but there are some things in this proposal that really I believe they are quite risky for industry in Europe. First, the acceleration of to accelerate the elimination of free allowances, or even more important, the absence of of credits for CO2 paid in the European Union when you are exporting outside, put put a lot of danger in the survival of companies that compete globally like ours. Amid of an energy crisis, these high prices that we are facing are not completely independent of the regulation that we have in Europe, as the director mentioned. For example, the CO2 prices immediately go into the price of electricity or into the price of other things in Europe, and that puts a burden not only on families, vulnerable households, but also on the future of industry. I personally believe we need a stable CO2 price that is sufficient to incentivize the reduction of emissions, but it doesn't. We don't face this volatility. That we need something more predictable for the European industries to establish a plan. I am not saying that that should be a tax or intervention of the Commission on the market or whatever, but we need something more stable. Also, I've been looking at the possible impacts on costs, on prices for consumers or industry. So we've been practicing scenarios about how this regulation is going to impact the prices of a lot of goods that energy products that we are using in the European Union, and the impact is going to be very material. So that means that we need to make this transition as efficient as possible to reduce that impact. So a real principle of technological neutrality, in my opinion, must be respected. For example, let's not just identify decarbonization with electrification. Electrification is going to be one of the means for decarbonization, but it's not the only one. It's going to be a part of the solution, but there are a lot of things that in the short or even ever cannot be electrified and need to be also decarbonized. For example, I just say something, and I don't want to be obsessed about mobility, but I read an interview to the BMW CEO Oliver Zipse the other day, who gave us an example with cars. He said one thing: accelerating the phase out of gasoline cars to replace them with electric cars by political decree is a big mistake, both economically and environmentally. Or, according to Volvo, building an electric car pollutes 70% more than the same gasoline model. Then that's reduced during the lifetime of the car, but they start with a 70% more emissions. So, for example, the current review of a European regulation for light-duty vehicles, in my opinion, is completely missed, as it is based on measuring emissions on the tailpipe. When we ask why, they say it's very complex to measure the emissions in the whole lifetime, in the whole life cycle. But because it's complex, we do something that is essentially mistaken in terms of fighting climate change. I really not believe it. I really believe we should encourage new pathways like electric vehicles, but without banning things that are basic for the survival of our industry in Europe, like it's the all the car manufacturing. Allowing renewable, low carbon, and synthetic fuels to complement the electrification of mobility will be key for a realistic and viable transformation of the mobility sector, while protecting and fostering the vehicle industry within the European Union. I'll give you a figure. In Spain, 75% of cars sleep in the streets. They cannot be charged at night in beautiful garages in a building or in a house. So these low carbon fuels are key also to decarbonize aviation, heavy duty, shipping. They must be heavily supported, and they can be used with current infrastructure. Sorry, decarbonizing transport efficiently. That's a word that I want to underline: efficiency. And that brings us all these kind of products to the issue of renewable electrolytic hydrogen. Only smart regulation will make it possible, much more than potential subsidies. We need competitive electricity prices. The main cost is OPEX. It's not the CAPEX that we put in the projects. Free of cost, and not free of costs that are not linked to generation. And a flexible time correlation regulation, much more flexible than the current draft proposal from the Commission. Current electricity prices are a huge barrier for renewable hydrogen, especially for industrial uses that require a supply 24 hours, 7 days a week. PPAs can help, but we need much, much more. Another, this is something also that worries me, and looks like I'm using this time to criticize, but I think it's important that we hear about things that could be improved in regulation. One specific issue of the Spanish industry is that sometimes Spanish regulation does not simply respect the level playing field that the European regulation establishes, and it puts us in somehow in a disadvantage compared to our competitors in the rest of Europe. It happens with bio sometimes. It happens with CCS, simply in Spain. CCS right now, it's not a technology that is acceptable, not like in the Netherlands, in France, or in other places. Or also in terms of hydrogen, there's much more push for only electrolytic hydrogen instead of hydrogen that comes from produced from biogas, which I believe it's another route that we should follow. We have to realize that we are going to be in a world that we have much more debt and lower resources to do the things we want, including fighting against climate change, notwithstanding the huge effort that and we thank it that the European Union is doing through the recovery packages. But this is the reason why we need the most smart, effective, and cost-saving climate policy going forward. To decarbonize sectors where electrification is currently unfeasible, and I'm talking about chemical, ceramics, food, steel, the short-term solution is either to decarbonize liquid fuels, like I said, to use decarbonized hydrogen, or apply CCS. In our case, Repsol, right now we're going to invest heavily in renewable hydrogen, and we are seeing strong support, which we thank both from European and Spanish authorities. Other technologies like BEUS and especially CCS have support from Brussels. In the last Innovation Fund, by the way, one of our projects was selected for being granted an ecoplanta in Tarragona. But 4 of the 7 projects, not ours, have CCS, have a form of CCS in them. Uh, but we don't find that support in Spain, and we find that could be a problem in the near future. To finish, until now, society has taken energy as granted, but the times we are living, high energy prices, geopolitical tensions, threats of supply cuts, show us how vulnerable we can become if we leave all our energy possibilities to a single source. We must diversify our options and not only bet on one type of energy. For the coming decades, we like it or not, we are going to need everything: oil, natural gas, renewable electricity, advanced biofuels, electric storage, things. If we make difficult to finance all these different products and technologies, they will come scarce and prices will go up, and we don't have that option. Let's not forget that, for example, oil, which is quite demonized, not only has energy uses, it also serves to produce materials that have contributed to generate the welfare of society and are needed for the energy transition and hospitals. Just transition is not leaving people behind, but it's the most important thing about just transition is being efficient. And I believe Europe is a great continent, and what the decisions we're making today is going to determine our future. And thanks, Angel, and thanks, Esade.
Thank you, Angel, for your view. Many points on many different issues. This is the view from a multi-energy company. Let's move to a high energy intensive industry, which is, in this case, we'll be talking with Brigitte from BS. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to tell you a little bit about our company first, to just give you also an impression about the background our argumentation is based on. In fact, we see climate change as one of the most fundamental challenges we are facing today. And we are strongly committed to do our share to fight climate change. In fact, we are working to reduce our carbon footprints already since years. So a lot of things already happened. We have improved the energy efficiency of all of our installations. We have switched our energy to highly efficient CHP plants, but that in fact led to a reduction of 50% of our CO2 emissions while we were doubling production. In fact, that had been already quite a lot. That's where we stood a while ago when we set ourselves new targets. We set ourselves targets to reduce further our emissions by 25% by 2030, to become climate neutral globally by 2050. So, in fact, there are 2 points which have to be considered when becoming climate neutral, and that is technology options, and then of course also competitiveness and financial options. So let's look at technologies first. Where are we standing there, and what can we do? We already use a lot of electricity. In fact, BASF in Ludwigshafen alone, at our largest plant, we use 6 terawatt hours of electricity, which is 1% of German consumption. And But in fact, it will not only double, just as in general, but for the chemical industry, it will be even more. For Ludwigshafen alone, we assume that we will at least triple or even have higher needs of electricity then. So what are we going to do with it? One is, of course, substituting the electricity we are producing now with our CHP plants. But a lot of our energy needs are based on steam. So that is another point, that by moving from power to steam, we can substitute gas by renewable electricity. But we are also looking at our technologies, and talking about technologies, just a little bit more on that. What is specific about BASF is that we really have long value chains, and we start with very few products like naphtha, gas, air, some minerals, then the highly energy intensive steps to produce some basic chemicals like ammonia, ethylene, propylene, hydrogen, some aromatics, still a very limited number of chemicals. But then we go into these value chains, which sometimes have 6 or more steps until we reach our final sales product. And in fact, BASF is selling 45,000 products. So from very, very few basic steps, we go to a huge amount of chemicals and the value chains in between. And in fact, I think value chain is not the right term. It's value networks, because it's really interlinked. There are processes, or a lot of processes, where we do not only have one product, but several products coming out of them. And even knowing how much CO2 each of these products creates is quite an important step, but is becoming more important in legislation when we talk about carbon border adjustments, because there it really is a very elemental point to have the carbon product carbon footprint to be even able to have a border adjustment at the border. And the ETS, like we have it in Europe today, it's based on installations, which makes absolutely sense. It's not based on products, and standards do not allow to really calculate the carbon footprint of each of these products today, because they still allow for a broad way of calculating carbon products, like allocation based on weight, allocation based on value. So the same product from different companies produced in the same way may lead, just on the way how you calculate it, to different carbon footprints. That's really one of the key issues when thinking about introducing carbon border adjustments. But how can these products in fact become carbon neutral? The key is to have new technologies for the most energy intensive steps at the first stage, which is, for example, for steam cracking, where you have temperatures of about 800 degrees to change this also from heating by gas to heating by electricity. Or for ammonia, which uses hydrogen, which is produced by steam methane reforming today, to use other technologies like electrolysis or methane pyrolysis, a process BASF is newly developing. And these new processes, they need additional amounts of electricity. But having the basic steps carbon neutral, then of course would also reduce the carbon footprint of the whole value chain. So in fact, renewable electricity in huge amounts is key for becoming carbon neutral, to reduce also the carbon footprint of all of these products. And in fact, seeing that we need much more renewable electricity, that is something where BASF is also getting engaged in investing in additional amounts of renewable electricity, like together with Vattenfall in the Netherlands with wind parks, or we have, we both think about producing on our own, but also to have contracts like a supply contract with Ørsted in the German North Sea, also based on offshore wind, or we have a project with RWE to produce more wind energy. So we really do what we can to enlarge the amount of renewable electricity available, but there are still hurdles which need to be overcome. And what would help really would be a single market for energy within Europe, with more efficient and cost-effective flows of energy between countries, scaling up integration and transport of renewable energy, and also develop bottlenecking of existing grids. But we do not expect electricity-based manufacturing technologies to be cost-effective under the current conditions. And to overcome this, we need to bridge the economic gap. But what we see in policy developments today, it's rather focused very much on making the existing technologies more expensive, like with having less free allocation from ETS in case of a CBAM, that in fact would increase the cost of the existing technologies. But those companies who need to invest in the new technologies and the new processes, these are the companies which then in fact receive less money and have also less money for the transition and for their new investments. And this is something where new instruments will be needed. They are discussed already, not detailed too much, like contracts for difference, which then also will give us the certainty that the new technologies really can be or that we can invest in these new technologies and have the certainty that we also will be able to sell the products. Of course, we are also working hardly to create further markets by really making more transparent the carbon footprints. We have developed an own system for BASF, where we defined how to allocate the emissions at each step of the value chain, so that we can really transparently show this now. But that is still at the very beginning. And as it has been said before, with carbon border adjustments, in fact, it would put a price on carbon also for imports. But for the European market, that's still there's still a gap towards new technologies where we need to invest in. And and the other issue is that on the global market, carbon border adjustments are not helpful, as we still have the cost gap then, because refunds are critical regarding WTO rules. That is discussed, but there is really no certainty regarding this, whether it will be accepted or whether we will face retaliation measures. And with chemicals being very or having a high share of exports, it's about 30% of European chemical production are exported out of the EU. That is a really big issue also, that there is no protection for that. That is But coming back to the value chains, also in the EU, we only can have carbon leakage protection if the full value chain is covered. So this instrument, CBAM, does not really incentivize the transition, but we really have to focus. I mentioned it already in between. We have to focus on investing in renewable electricity much more, in making it available, cost competitive, and also making it available at the sites where we do have our industrial production today. And this is just the way we can then hopefully manage to then come to the transition towards carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this view from high energy intensive industry, issues of technology, of cost regarding renewable energy, and quite some ideas there too. So let's move on now to our next speaker, Mr. Stefan Lechtenbaumer from the Wuppertal Institute. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angel, and thanks a lot to you and to Esade for inviting me to this very distinguished panel with Director Nunes de Almeida, Angel Bautista, and Brigitte Hugestein, and I'm really honored to be here. And let me try to give some additional thoughts on your questions that you raised. How can we align the energy and industry transitions to net zero? And I would like to say that the core of that, not all, but the core of that is in the energy intensive industries. They use roughly 50% of all of the energy and in the industry, and they are difficult to decarbonize. That means that in these industries we have important technology issues, but also we have less efficiency with going to electrification and other energies. So we do not really gain that much. And that means particularly in these industries, which is steel, which is basic chemicals, which is also cement and others, we need really lots of green energy for transition to going green. And maybe I can give you some examples from German scenario analysis. For Germany, it has been analyzed by several teams already, but we are also working more on European perspectives. For Germany, which still has a lot of basic industries, transition to net zero would mean that industrial electricity consumption might increase by 50 to 100%, so could double. That would mean that in spite of electrification of the residential sector, of transport sector, industry will maintain its share of roughly 45% of electricity consumption. So it's really huge. And that's not the only thing. Industry will also most probably be a significant consumer of green hydrogen. Definitely the first big consumer and possibly also the largest. But the real amount of the electricity demand, but particularly the hydrogen demand, depends on the amount of future production of basic materials in Germany and in Europe, if you want to say so, and particularly of steel and basic chemicals. And there are mainly two drivers for that. The first one is more secondary materials in steel, but particularly also chemical recycling is very relevant for that, will lower the hydrogen demand massively, and vice versa, of course. If we have less secondary options, we need more hydrogen. And the other driver will probably be locational effects of industrial decarbonization. And that's something we call renewables pull. And let me briefly give you some more explanation on these 2 points. The one point, let's take chemical recycling. We know that one very big part of hydrogen demand in the future will be for replacing fossil feedstocks in chemicals production, so in petrochemicals. And there's, of course, a major chance for Europe to use more chemical recycling, so to use the plastic waste that is already there, which is much more energy efficient and would enable us to come to green chemistry or non-fossil plastics with much less hydrogen than if we need to do that all from scrap using green hydrogen together with CO2. And in the steel system, energy efficiency is also extremely higher for secondary steel. And that would also save a lot of hydrogen. But also the other point, the renewables pull, I think, is an important aspect. For example, in the steel sector, the green energy is the dominant cost factor of the transition. And the reduced iron is already a big energy carrier. And so there is lots of argument to expect that over time, lots of the production may go over to places where green energy is cheap. And there are already examples for this, at least on the planning level. Plans are there in Sweden, in Australia, but also on a smaller level in Germany. Similar trends may also emerge in petrochemistry, where the basic production steps already today follow energy costs, and we might see petrochemical production move more, for example, to the MENA region. Maybe NEOM plants in Saudi Arabia are the first sign of something like that. So that could be also very significant, and that will, of course, make a difference for the energy challenge. Let me come with this to the next point, and that's cooperation. So how can industry and electricity sectors better cooperate on defossilization? And I would like to mention that this is really a crucial point. And again, here, Sweden is a good example. And the first movers in Sweden going for green steel now is a coalition of ore mining company, steel industry, steel company, and electricity industry. Of course, all of these three are public-owned entities in Sweden, which makes it easier, but the pattern is clear. You need the collaboration of all these three to really make more of what you have. And that case of Northern Sweden, they are cooperating to massively increase the value added from Northern Sweden, which has been an ore exporter for over a century, but will now become an exporter of green iron or even green steel, making use of the vast renewable energy resources that they also have over there. So I think that's really an example that shows that cross-sector cooperation is the absolute key for such developments of industry to going net zero. But it also shows that such developments can happen in Europe, within the European Union, and need not necessarily lead everything out of it, because we have also other resource regions with lots of renewable energy. And hopefully, at least, this is a good starting point for these regions to become not only energy porter, but create industrial value chains, green industrial value chains based on that endowment. However, it's particularly challenging if you have to create cooperation not only with your neighbors in your state-owned Swedish companies, but when you have to do that to span large distances from the energy source to the industrial customer, when you need to involve governments, lots of planning issues, lots of big infrastructure issues, that makes it, of course, much more challenging. And with that, maybe briefly on the 4 main challenges for decarbonizing energy-intensive industries. And I start with the smallest. I think green electricity is no more even really more expensive than fossil-based ones. So for many industries, that's rather an issue of how can they get power purchase agreements with the providers of this green energy. And finally, it's an infrastructure question. Will we have enough space for these renewable developments to be done? Will we have the infrastructure in time, as Director Nunes already mentioned clearly? next challenge for the energy intensives, steel, for example, but also chemical feedstocks, green hydrogen is much, much more expensive than coal or chemical feedstocks. Here, and we have large quantities here. So there it's really a big cost issue, which will need public support in the end for a certain time. Next point, we do need green markets. But for the first steps, for the first movers, green markets are not so easy because they tend to go to search and find successfully the low-hanging fruits, which are sometimes in regions where there is no transition challenge, where there's already some green energy linked to industrial assets. And bringing that to the broader industrial ecosystem, that's really the challenge. So to plan ahead, to go for a long-term transition of the whole industry, and that needs much more of planning and cooperation. And finally, the rest of the world is not waiting for Europe, I think. In other regions, particularly China, but also US, also lots is going on in that direction. And so we need to be quick to maintain our good position in that. With regards to policy instruments, let me briefly point 5 things. To foster cross-industrial cooperation is very important, as I already mentioned. And maybe one example, what we are doing in Germany, we have created the network in North Rhine-Westphalia called InfoClimate, with state government, industries from energy and basic materials industries such as RWE, Shell, BASF, ThyssenKrupp, together with science, identifying crucial points. We need strategic infrastructure development for hydrogen, for electricity, but also to a limited extent to carbon. We need financial support for CapEx and OpEx. We need to create green markets, standards and regulation. And of course, we need to be intelligent on the international dimension. I let it with that in order to not to take too much time. Thanks a lot. And I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussion.
Sorry, thank you very much for this, Stefan. Great, great overview. Let's jump to the Q&A round. Unfortunately, time flies, and there is so much to talk about in this systemic transformation we're living through. So let me go back to Director Nunes, perhaps, and ask him. Feel free to comment on any of the other speakers, but I have a particular question for the director. So we are seeing, you were talking about how systemic this transformation is. There's a lot of complexity in the type of number and type of policies being carried out. We're seeing also how many different private actors, European business actors and social actors are involved. And finally, we are in a world which doesn't always move in accordance with what we are doing in the European Union. So out of these 3 dimensions, what is it that you would think is the major and most important challenge?
What is the most important challenge of this on this whole conundrum we are situated in?
Exactly. What is what you feel is
I think that, that more than thinking about how are we going to live with CBAM or the ETS or the carbon price, I think that we need to get huge amounts of decarbonized energy quite soon. And that is the only way out of the trap we're into. And that addresses one of the questions that one of the participants puts, is that, do you consider that the EU should pay more attention to the geopolitics of oil and gas supply? This gives us the opportunity also to be largely self-reliant. If we think that the future is something based on a combination of solar, wind, and renewables-based or decarbonized-based hydrogen, you Europe can do it. We can largely do it in this continent. It is a possibility. We have been energy dependent, and we are paying still now the price of energy dependence. We have a chance now to become largely energy independent. So I think that the main challenge, in my view, is to upscale the decarbonized forms of energy as much as possible, and also to address another question that I see that one of the participants, how important do we think energy storage will be to support the energy transition? Well, it's hugely important. That's probably an area, contrary to what I said before, where I think the technology has yet to come up with solutions, in the sense that, you know, you've got often this issue that, you know, we all know about the intermittency of renewables and the difficulties of energy, of electricity stockage, that you need a buffer. Should that buffer be nuclear? Should that buffer be gas? But of course, you know, if you would have energy storage, that would improve the situation enormously. And to all the other three, for the other three members of the panel, I mean, it was interesting to hear everything you said. I would love to be 2 hours with each of you to go through each of the individual points that you've made and the criticisms you have expressed. The only thing I can offer to you is that we have launched these transition pathways, both on energy intensives and on mobility. We will probably go ahead also on renewable related industries rather soon. Engage with these processes, engage with the European Commission, put us your points of view in writing, engage with our people. I'm not sure that we can address everything that you'd like, but we're not deaf.
Thank you, Director Nunes. So let's move on to Brigitta. Again, please feel free to comment on any of the other points that have been raised. The question for you is, what are you seeing your peers from outside of the EU doing? So I'm seeing you, BASF, doing a lot of different things, from going backward integration into almost becoming and going into electricity generation, and these technological changes. Are you seeing that movement in your competitors and your peers from Asia and from the United States?
Well, of course, other regions also look at how they can become less carbon intensive. We see that in China, where we also invest in new installations. We see it in the US. But we see that these regions take different approaches to what we see in Europe. Especially in the US, it's much more about incentivizing and funding measures than about making the alternative, the existing measures more expensive. And that, of course, is something which has to be balanced. And I think that also regarding timing, I mentioned how much we already did starting from 1990. I see that, for example, in China, they are moving quickly also, but they are still on the way having more efficient installations, which are steps which we have already taken. We are at a very high, at a very high level already. And we see it also, if we compare, we are really moving from gas to electricity, which is also a point which makes it more costly, the steps we still have ahead now. While others, which if you look globally, there's still a lot of coal-based chemistry. Of course, they have big steps they still could take, which would have much lower avoidance costs than what we are doing here. Of course, we are also moving on learning curves here, but being ahead of this transformation means that we are still also paying high transition costs for developing these technologies. We didn't talk about timing so far. There are technologies which are on the table, for example, for CO2-free ammonia. That is something which could be done technologically. But for other measures like the electric steam cracker, which by the way, we also do in cooperation with other companies. We are not doing that alone. But there it's still about really developing these technologies. And we are at the stage that we are planning to have a pilot plant on this, to learn on this pilot plant, and then go the next step into large production, which probably will be after 2030. So there's also this timeline which still has to be considered, and of course, as a front runner, paying for these development costs also makes it more costly, and that is where there should be also some global balance between incentivizing and also looking at technology phase out like we had at the Glasgow Climate Conference. It's rather clear that the future will not be about coal, and I'm really happy about this global agreement on that. But these are also things we need for global harmonization. We need more global harmonization to be really able also to deliver in a cost-effective way, and we need the willingness also of our customers to pay more for CO2-free technologies.
Thank you for that, Brigitte. Let me just let's move on to Stefan before we finish off with Angel. Stefan, so very interesting your point on localization. So what is your suggestion? What can we done with that those localization effects of renewables, that renewables pools you were mentioning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, I think that's an important trend that we will see, and we cannot not avoid it, because it's basic trend where the renewable energy is cheap. There is a strong pull over there, but we can steer it, for example, into other places of the European Union. I've brought the Swedish example. They are doing that very actively. They have lots of clean energy, but also Spain, I think Angel can tell us about that, but other southern and eastern EU member states also have big potentials there. And I think we see that not only in the energy intensive, that green energy supply is a locational factor for industry. So that could be very interesting to really make a strategy out of that for member states of the Union. Of course, it was mentioned in the questions that we will also see some trends to Northern Africa, which is also important to have a good cooperation with them in the future. And maybe one point we try to make to work on this decarbonization club idea more with that direction, because we said, for example, steel industry or chemical industry need global transition pathways. All countries in the world have to go that way. Europe is not enough, and we need to share a joint strategy and develop that. So I'm not talking about CBAM and alternatives to that, but I'm talking about really trying to shape these developments. And I think there is lots of opportunities in that.
Thank you for that, Angel. You've got the last word. So there was a question from Joao in the chat on voluntary climate markets. What is your opinion on those, and could they help in aligning and incentivizing industry towards net zero?
I believe that voluntary carbon markets are going to be a part of the efforts to decarbonize. And what's good about it is that a lot of times it would help also nature, and it will help the environment. Having said that, it shouldn't be. I don't believe companies should decarbonize by saying that I am purchasing credits or whatever in a market. We should use technology. We should decarbonize. We should commit in reducing emissions in our own operations to the limit technology permits us. And only this it can be used as a commercial instrument. For example, if you want to sell LNG, for example, decarbonized LNG, then you can, okay, I just buy credits and put it. But it's more than a kind of commercial matter, that it's good for developing this kind of markets that are going to be, I believe, good for helping reforestation, etc., etc. But I really do not believe that that should be the one of the basic tools of industry for decarbonizing. The basic tools of industry for decarbonizing is technology in the framework of smart regulation, in my opinion. And only to mention two things that has been said. Obviously, the push of Repsol for green hydrogen also has to do with that we have a lot of operations in Spain, that obviously we have a lot of resources. We see the location in Spain of the company, of our plants, as an opportunity to be a big player in the new hydrogen market. And last, thanks director for the offer. Obviously we will try to interact as much as possible with the commission. And regarding the geopolitics of oil and gas, only one mention: to be independent also has geopolitical implications in terms of, for example, our vicinity policy with the north of Africa, for example. So it should be seen in a holistic manner somehow, which does not mean that I completely agree with you that we should have more strategic autonomy in energy. But sometimes I believe that the Commission has done a very good job in gas. I believe their Commissioner Arias also was was working very much in having more LNG plants, etc., to have more diversification of sources. For the pipeline between Spain and France should have been finished, in my opinion. I believe that that's something that probably the Commission also wanted, but for whatever reasons it didn't happen. But I really believe that in that sense, the Commission has done in the last years a very good job. But we are where we are. We have the natural resources that we have. And thank you, Angel, and thank you everyone for this wonderful event.
Great. Unfortunately, we can't talk 2 hours with each one of you as Director Nunes was proposing. This is a phenomenal debate, and the challenges are huge and multidimensional. But I am afraid we have hit our limit. So I want to thank our speakers. It's an honor to have you with us, to be able to have these conversations. I really want to thank the Commission for coming out and interacting as always in these panels. I want to thank industry, Brigitte and Angel, for coming out and putting out their positions and their ideas and their recommendations and suggestions, and of course Stefan for bringing also the expert, the think tank view into this conversation. So thank you very much to all of you. Just a quick reminder that we will have our next panel on fast electrification coming soon, and I hope to see you all there in a few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.